What would a realistic best-case scenario for Vice President Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party look like on a 2024 presidential election map? I will be doing an updated version of Donald Trump and the Republican Party's best-case scenario as well on this channel now that Biden has dropped out, so do be sure to subscribe down below and hit that notification bell while you're at it so you don't miss it in the coming days. Harris currently trails Donald Trump by 2.5 percentage points based on 73 polls in Decision Desk HQ's latest polling average. Now, obviously, most of these polls came in before the news that Biden withdrew from the presidential race, but conventional wisdom would have already told us that Harris will perform better than Biden, considering how weak of a candidate he had become following his dismal debate performance. But now we have the data to back that up, and it's likely only going to get better for her over the coming weeks, with the convention still to come. Harris definitely has a higher ceiling than Biden in a head-to-head contest against Trump, but it's important to remember that her floor may still be just as low. She does currently enter the race with worse favorability ratings than Biden. Per DDHQ again, she has a net negative favorability rating of almost 18 points. And that is compared to Biden's negative 16%. Both, of course, trail well behind Trump with a net negative 8% favorability. Still unpopular overall. All three of these candidates are historically unpopular, actually. Prior to 2016, it was much more common to see presidential candidates in the positives here. Goes to show how polarized our nation has become. With all of that said, though, Kamala Harris is just as capable of not capturing any momentum as she is of capturing it over the coming months, and then losing in a landslide against Trump just as Biden would have. Remember, of course, her 2020 bid for the Democratic nomination came to a crashing halt 2 months before the Iowa caucuses. This video, though, is supposed to take a look at what the best case scenario for her is in a realistic environment. That means I'm not just going to place down all of these key battlegrounds as leaning blue and then calling it a day, because at this point in the cycle, with Trump leading in almost every swing state, the most realistic best case scenario for the vice president is still a narrow electoral college victory. On your screen right now is the Battleground map with the 15 states and 2 congressional districts that could theoretically go either way in a landslide race. This is not likely to be a landslide race, so most of these states still do hold a degree of lean toward either party. National polling has remained pretty tight all cycle long, and Democrats' biggest vulnerability did just drop out of the race. Now, even in a best-case scenario for Harris, former President Trump should still have no problem holding Maine's 1st congressional district, Florida, and Texas. He has consistently polled very strongly in both of these electoral behemoths here, Florida and Texas, and both states feature demographic profiles that are trending to the right, as Hispanic voters in the Rio Grande Valley here in South Texas and in the Miami-Dade metropolitan region over here in South Florida have swung very hard to the right over the last couple cycles. On the other side, if Kamala Harris does win the Electoral College this November, she will certainly win New Mexico, Virginia, and Maine's statewide contest. The last time that any of these states voted for the Republican presidential candidate was in 2004, and Biden carried New Mexico by 11 points in 2020, Virginia by 10, and Maine by 9%. So that leaves us with just 9 states now that will either lean or just ever so slightly tilt in either direction. Trump currently holds an electoral vote advantage with 219 to Harris's 211. You can think of these numbers as both candidates' floors so long as this race remains competitive. In a best-case scenario for Harris, though, she should win Minnesota by a relatively comfortable margin, say 4 to 6 points. It leans blue, and the same can be said for New Hampshire. Biden won both by 7 points in 2020. They followed a similar trend after the 2016 election, where Hillary Clinton just narrowly held them by 1.5 in Minnesota and just about 0.4% in New Hampshire. Minnesota notably holds the longest active blue streak in the entire country today, having not backed a GOP presidential candidate since 1972, while New Hampshire last voted red at the start of the 21st century for George W. Bush in the 2000 election. Now, polling in both of these states this cycle has shown a more competitive race than expected, but again, that was with a tanking Biden as the candidate. I do think that Kamala should stop the bleeding, so to speak, here. At least she has to if she is going to hit 270. There is just no path to victory for her and the Democrats if they don't win Minnesota and New Hampshire by at least a couple of points. That's also true of Nebraska's 2nd district, which backed Biden by 6.5 points in 2020 and is rapidly left trending. So long as the Republican-controlled state legislature does not get rid of Nebraska's split electoral vote system by Election Day, it will lean blue on the map. That leaves the 7 most discussed swing states of the cycle, or at least those that entered this cycle as the core 7 battlegrounds. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania make up the key Rust Belt trio that decided the last 2 presidential races, and they are joined by North Carolina and Georgia in the southeast, and then Arizona and Nevada in the southwest. These 4 states across the Sun Belt are growing in population and are generally more racially diverse and left-trending on a demographic level relative to the Rust Belt states that are generally declining in population and have trended to the right in the Trump era. Yet with that said, with Biden at the top of the Democratic ticket, we saw Trump consistently perform better in the polls in the Sun Belt states than anywhere in the Rust Belt. Biden either polled ahead of Trump or within the margin of error in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania for most of this cycle, whereas he trailed Trump by at least 4 to sometimes even 8 points in North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. Now, this can at least partially be attributed to the fact that the Sun Belt states are more religious, especially North Carolina and Georgia, located in the so-called Bible Belt. They are therefore more traditionally and socially conservative. The issue of abortion, then, which has continued to be the Democratic Party's strongest polling issue since the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, has proven itself less of a rallying cry here in these states than it was in the Rust Belt, most notably in the 2022 midterms, where Democrats swept the competitive races for governor in all 3 states and significantly outperformed polling expectations in U.S. Senate and House races down the ballot as well. Now, early polls between Harris and Trump have suggested a continuation of that Biden versus Trump trend. Across Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, Harris trails Trump by an average of 2.8%, based on a total of 15 combined polls. Comparatively, she trails Trump in Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada by 7.6% on average across 16 polls. Now, depending, of course, on who she ends up picking as her vice presidential running mate, most likely a younger white male, Kamala Harris's candidacy, at least in the short term, will expand the battleground map, putting Sunbelt states back into play where Biden was becoming more and more likely to lose. That said, this advantage may be offset by a potentially weaker performance in the Rust Belt states, where Biden had showed persistent strength. I personally expect Harris to consolidate some of the minority support that Biden had lost, especially among voters who view both Trump and Biden unfavorably, though she will probably struggle to match Biden's unusually strong backing from older white voters, which is key here in the Rust Belt states. Consequently, her most viable path to victory lies in significantly improving her standing in the national popular votes, whereas Biden probably could have scraped by with less of a popular vote improvement. That's just the nature of the electoral college bias these days. Now, Harris has served 7 years as district attorney of San Francisco, 6 years as attorney general of California, 4 years as a U.S. Senator, and now 4 years as Vice President, yet she has never really experienced a competitive general election in deep blue California. With that in mind, this will be her first true test, one that Democrats desperately need her to pass. The path for Harris is then relatively simple. Win as many of these 7 key states as you can, as given that they are all bunched up so close together in terms of margin, there is just no one combination that is significantly more likely than any other. Again, personally, I do tend to believe the fundamentals in Michigan are strongest for Democrats. Biden won it by a greater margin than any of the others in 2020, 3 percentage points, and it has voted to the left of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania in every presidential race held in the last 2 decades. Plus, Democrats have performed strongly in contested down-ballot races since then as well. So with all of that said, a Kamala Harris electoral college victory effectively mandates carrying Michigan to start. Beyond that, it gets a little more murky. I know that Kamala has been spending a lot of time in North Carolina over the last few months on behalf of Biden, but it's just a bit too red, fundamentally speaking, for me to see her winning it this November. I think she'll outperform Biden in the Tar Heel states, yet ultimately fall short by a couple of points, just like every other Democrat over the last 15 years or so. An interesting note here is that each of the last 8 federal statewide elections held in North Carolina for president and U.S. Senate were all decided by less than 6%, yet they have always gone Republican. Now, I'm also of the opinion that Georgia has trended a bit too far out of reach for Democrats this cycle. Probably the most traditionally conservative state of the key battlegrounds, it has trended hard to the left over the last decade thanks to the growth and diversification of Atlanta. Very similar to what's happened in Arizona, is Phoenix has seen a population boom like no other, with a large share of the new inhabitants in both cities coming from left-leaning areas of the country. Now, it'll be interesting to see whether Harris taps Arizona Senator Mark Kelly as her running mate. He is currently the favorite, according to Polymarket. He is as popular a politician as you'll find in Arizona and could be worth a couple of points as part of the ticket. The same can be said for Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. But enough dilly-dallying around now. The best case scenario for Harris on this map is a narrow, and I mean a very narrow victory, like no more than a point or 2, perhaps less, in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, as well as Nevada. Again, I think Arizona and Georgia are just a bit too far out of reach for Democrats at this stage, unless something big changes like Harris picks Kelly or Trump's legal problems come up again somehow. Nevada, while Republican trending, is still a fundamentally bluer state than its Sunbelt counterparts at Biden +2 in 2020. It's going to be very close, don't get me wrong. Again, even in a best-case scenario for Harris, I think she just barely squeezes by in these states. So the electoral vote count now is Harris 276, Trump 262. Again, this is a best-case scenario for Harris. For all the energy that she has injected into the Democratic Party over the last couple days or so, she's still going to face an uphill battle pulling back the support that Biden had lost over the last 4 years. Keep yourself posted for the Trump version of this video in the coming days by subscribing to my channel and turning on that little notification bell. That's all for today's video. Feel free to let me know in the comments what you think of this map and these electoral race ratings. Shout out to my channel members on screen here. Thank you so much for your support. If you'd like to become a member, go ahead and click the join button below this video to receive exclusive perks. Please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. You can check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.